Hi everyone. Thank you all for coming to the event. I'm not sure what time it is for everybody, but thank you for taking time out of your schedule to attend our event on African Samurai, true story, a legendary Black warrior in feudal Japan. So thank you. I'm going to pass it off to Miles, who's a student at Howard University, and to kick things off. So thank you for all coming.
Thank you, Amir. That was great. Once again, hello, everybody. My name is Miles Ezilo. I am a graduating senior political science major, economics minor from Atlanta, Georgia. And on behalf of the Ralph Bunche Center, we would like to thank the East Asia National Resource Center for helping bring this event to fruition. I had the pleasure of studying abroad in Japan for my fall 2019 semester. And not only was it amazing, but it also deepened my passion for East Asian studies. And while I was there, I constantly wondered what was the connection between my identity as a Black man and the history of the people around me. Just was there any historic diaspora of the Black man in Asia or in Japan? So that's why I'm super excited to hear about this presentation. I feel like it's going to be enlightening for everybody. So once again, thank you, East Asia National Resource Center. The Ralph Bunche Center is happy to be a part of this. And without further ado, I'd like to pass it to Jisoo Kim. And just as a brief introduction, Jisoo Kim is a Korean Foundation Associate Professor of History, International Affairs, and East Asian Languages and Literatures, and the Director of the Institute for Korean Studies at George Washington, and the Director of the East Asia NRC. She also currently serves as the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Korean Studies. She's a specialist in gender, law, and emotions in Korean history. And her broader research interests include gender and sexuality, crime and justice, forensic medicine, literary representations of the law, history of emotions, vernacular, and gender writing. So thank you, Jisoo Kim. Thank you for everything, and I look forward to seeing the rest of the presentation.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Miles. I would like to welcome all of you to our exciting event this evening. Since the pandemic, we have been hosting some of our events in the evening to accommodate the time difference for speakers in other parts of the world. Today's speaker, Professor Lockley, is currently in Japan. So it is early morning for him right now, and I would like to thank him for spending his morning with us today. This event was organized as part of celebrating the Black History Month, as well as promoting our diversity initiative in our suite, and which constitutes of NRC, GWIX, or Institute for Korean Studies, Secret Center for Asian Studies, and Asian Studies Program. Our team has been making efforts to make our programs open, inclusive, and reachable to diverse audiences as much as possible. We strive to generate programs that are not only inclusive, but reflective of diverse perspectives in Asian studies. So as part of our diversity initiative, it is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Thomas Lockley, who will be presenting on his fascinating book titled African Samurai. He is, and let me introduce him before I turn it over to him. He is Associate Professor at Nihon University College of Law in Tokyo, where he teaches courses related to the international and multicultural history of Japan and East Asia. He has been a visiting scholar at the School of Oriental and African Studies at University of London in 2018. He has numerous publications, including textbooks and articles. Today, he'll present on his most recent book titled African Samurai, The True Story of a Legendary Black Warrior in Feudal Japan. Well, once again, we're super excited to have Professor Lockley with us this evening. Without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Professor Lockley. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you very much indeed for that warm welcome from all of you. And it's such an honor to be with you tonight for you, this morning for me. And I'm very happy to be able to share with you this story, which many people have been wanting to know more about. I'm going to start the presentation now. I'll be very happy to answer questions at the end. I believe there's a way of doing that you've been informed of and I can't wait to answer your questions. So please, please, please do get those questions in. And I believe there is a book giveaway as well. I'm sorry I won't be able to sign it because I'm a long way off, but I hope that anybody that wins those books enjoys them. Thank you very much. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to start into my presentation now. Yasuke, an African warrior in Japan. So what I'm going to be talking about today, of course, is Yasuke, but we are going to look first about his background. Where did he come from? How did he get to Japan? Then we're going to look at his meeting with Nobunaga. Nobunaga was the preeminent warlord in Japan at this time. And of course, Yasuke's connection with Nobunaga is one of the main reasons we are left with so many records of his existence. We're going to find out about him becoming a samurai, what that means. We're going to find out about him in battle, on campaign with Nobunaga, the last battle. And then we're going to look at Yasuke, his legacy for today, and the way he is related to Japan's current ever more multicultural society. So first, to start off with how an African might have got to Japan in the 16th century. Until the 20th century, when the slave trade was finally abolished in 1960, 1960s anyway, over 11 million Africans were sold and trafficked in the Indian Ocean through various different methods, but most of them ended up at some point in Arabia or in India. There were also many free Africans who made the same journey. There were diplomatic missions from African rulers. There were mercenary bands who were hiring their services, mainly to Indians, also to Arab armies in the north. And there are also traders who traded African ships around this time, often on the East Coast at least, were fairly comparable to Arab ships in size, and therefore they engaged in trade as well. In the 16th century, Japan itself was embroiled in a civil war. And by the time Yasuke arrives in 1579, that civil war had been going on for about 110 years. Imagine if we were in a war which had lasted longer than between now and the First World War. It's that long. War had been a daily fact of life for Japan and Japanese people for more than 110 years. Within this war period, which is called the Age of the Country at War, we have the first Jesuit missionaries arriving in Japan in 1549. The most famous, of course, is Francisco Xavier, but he actually came with a team of somewhere up to 10 people, two of whom were also missionaries. One was Chinese, another was a mixed-race Indian man, and they also had Japanese accompanying them from Malacca and Macau as well. In 1577, a man called Alessandro Valiano, who was the visitor, the inspector of missions who had been sent from Rome, employed Yasuke. We don't know exactly how or where he did this, but it was in India, probably in Goa or Cochin. He employed him as a bodyguard because Valiano was going into one of the most dangerous places in the world, Japan, and he needed some kind of muscle to keep him safe. Of course, a Jesuit missionary cannot travel with a private army. He is a priest. So the best thing he could do to at least have some kind of protection was to employ somebody like Yasuke. And we shall see why Yasuke was the obvious person to employ later on in the talk. In 1579, July 25th, Yasuke and Valiano arrived in Japan on a Portuguese ship on the very, very western tip of the western island of Kyushu. From 1579 to 1581, Yasuke and Valiano, who he is protecting, of course, traveled to various missions within the Kyushu area. This is a picture of people who might have looked similar to Yasuke. In the picture, I hope you can see my mouse here. Picture we can see Africans. They are accompanying, in this occasion, a Portuguese merchant. We can see a standard bearer for the Portuguese merchant. We can see an armed bodyguard here. This might have been something like Yasuke looked like. We can see porters This one's carrying bread, silk, the dignitary's chair, and behind us there's a whole retinue, a whole queue of different people doing other things as well. Another picture of a bodyguard. This is the man here. He's an African with a bow and arrow this time. We can also see a parasol bearer. We can see several other very, very nicely attired African people here. They are servants or attendants on this Portuguese merchant. We can see also, very different from the extremely richly attired Africans, poor man down here is very drably attired. He's got his hand in his face like this. The Japanese artist is clearly trying very sensitively to show status differences between the people in the picture, and has very perceptively noticed that Africans are different. They are unique and individual human beings, and they have unique and individual places in this story. This man down here is likely a slave, not a servant or attendant, but a slave, a baggage carrier essentially, and he's clearly not having the best of lives. So Yasuke comes into the historical record when he starts to travel to Kyoto, which was then called Miyako and was the capital of Japan. Valiano had to go there to ask for permission to leave Japan. He was going to ask permission from Nobunaga, Oda Nobunaga, who was the most important and powerful warlord of the time. He controlled the whole of the country, which was the most productive and richest part of the country. And therefore, if Valiano wanted his mission, his people, and Japanese Christians to enjoy protection after he left, he needed to talk to Nobunaga and ask his permission for all of these things. Nobunaga, as it happens, was quite receptive to missionaries, not because of their missionary talk necessarily, but because they brought new knowledge of the outside world with them, and he was a man who could not stop studying, could not stop learning about anything which would be interesting and useful to him. In Sakai, which is now just the west of Osaka, they landed. Valiano, Yasuke, and a whole crowd of choir boys and other Christians who would then process through the center of the country to the capital city, Miyako. In Sakai, they had never seen a procession like this. It was amazing. There were lights, there were lanterns, there were big banners held high. Very strange looking people, these Europeans and Africans, but it wasn't just the Africans, it was Yasuke who was singled out as the main point of interest for the Japanese, the local Japanese people. It's recorded by the Jesuits, who were either very happy with this because it got them a lot of attention, or a little bit miffed by this because it took the attention from the word of the Lord. By the Jesuits, the property was damaged, people were crushed. When the same thing happened in Miyako, in Kyoto, the capital city, people even died in the crowds. There were so many thousands of people clamoring to get a touch, a look of Yasuke. He took refuge within the church compound, and the people were pushing down the walls, they were throwing stones, and Nobunaga, who was about 5 to 10 minutes walk away in his in the temple he had commandeered as his quarters within Kyoto, heard this crowd, this riot going on, demanded to see who was disturbing his peace. So Yasuke is summoned before Nobunaga immediately. He has to go. He's just been at the threat of his life. He's been in the middle of a crowd of thousands. The crowd of thousands disappeared now. There's a squad of men come to take him to Japan's great lord. Not even Valiano, his master, has had an audience with Nobunaga yet. So Yasuke is the first person of the Jesuit party to be granted this audience, or to be summoned to an audience. Nobunaga was very impressed with his Japanese ability. We know that Yasuke was quite a good Japanese speaker by this point. After all, he'd been there 2 years, and 2 years is enough to learn quite a lot of Japanese, and especially behavior to do with it. But Nobunaga did not believe the skin was the color of black. the black ink, which is the way the Japanese sources describe it. He probably thought that the Jesuits, who were always trying to surprise him with new gifts, had tried to amuse him with something out of the ordinary, perhaps a warrior who's got up in war paint or something. He had that kind of idea, we think. Anyway, he asked Yasuke to strip to the waist, and Nobunaga demanded a brush and water and scrubbed Yasuke. Then, no doubt, much to the amusement of everybody there, of course, Yasuke's skin pigment did not come off. The truth realized, Nobunaga sends for his sons and throws a great party for his guests. The three sons arrive. We don't have the details of the party. What we do know is that they would have questioned him, Yasuke, that is, they would have asked him so many questions. The sons had been sent for as part of their education. This was something they needed to see, and Nobunaga would have made the most of this occasion. Also, at the end, as was customary with this kind of occasion in Japan at the time, the host gifted the guest of honor a large gift. In this case, it was a huge sum of money, approximately 30 kilos worth of copper coins. Now, copper coins don't sound like they're worth very much, but in those days, they were the international currency, and they would be strung on strings, which could be put around somebody's body, and therefore you could walk around with your bank literally around your body like a belt or a sling. Nobunaga may have done this slightly as a joke. Yasuke was a very strong man, and to give a strong man a box of 30 kilos, even for somebody quite strong to lift, that is quite amusing, and it may have also been part of the joke and the amusement of the evening to see whether he was able to lift it easily. Sadly, we shall never know, but Yasuke was instantly a pretty rich man, and of course that was not a bad thing for Yasuke. Within 2 days, Valiana also had his own audience. Yasuke was not present at this audience, despite what you may see on various television depictions of this in Japan and elsewhere. But we know at some point in that audience with Nobunaga, Nobunaga asked Valiana to let Yasuke into his service, to second him, if you like, or to transfer his service to the Japanese warlord. Valiana would not have been able to say no, of course, so he said yes. To say no would have been a huge offense to Nobunaga, and would probably put the mission in peril. So Yasuke then enters into Nobunaga's service. This is a posthumous portrait of Lord Nobunaga. I have it on good advice that this is probably a fake painted in the 19th century. However, it does look very much like other Nobunaga portraits from the time, and therefore I have kept in the presentation to give a good idea of what he may have looked like. This particular picture is held in a temple dedicated to Nobunaga's memory and to his family. And whether it is a fake or not, I think it's quite a nice depiction. We can see the man. He's clearly full of purpose. He's actually a tall man, though you can't see that. Okay, so why was Nobunaga so fascinated with Yasuke? We know, of course, that he'd probably never seen a black man before, which is, of course, reason enough to be fascinated. But Yasuke was not just any African man. He was 188 centimeters tall, which would have made him an absolute giant in this age. We don't know for definite, but it would probably have been about 30, possibly even 40 centimeters higher than the average Japanese person of the time. Even Nobunaga, who is known as a tall man, would have been a good head lower than Yasuke. That's one thing, of course, tall people command to a certain extent everybody else's view. But not only that, Yasuke was described as good looking with a great demeanor, intelligent. He is described later on as entertaining to Nobunaga. He is described as having the strength of 10 men, which is a euphemism for being very. It doesn't literally mean he has the strength of 10 men. Though there is reason to believe that perhaps Nobunaga's men did try this out as part of their training. There's another one which I have looked at it in detail. It's not documented at the time, but we can see many of the statues of the Buddha and also various deities and shrines in Japan at the time had dark black skin, essentially very similar black skin to that of Yasuke. It may well have been seen that he was a kind of divine visitor gracing Miyako, gracing Nobunaga with his presence. And of course, for Nobunaga to have a semi-divine, or at least a divine-looking being, man, with him would have also raised Nobunaga's status. If it needed raising any more, which it probably didn't, but it would have raised it still further in the eyes of Nobunaga's supplicants and his people as well. This is mainly taken from the descriptions of other European people who saw these black Buddhas and these black gods and remarked upon them. And it's also, as I've walked around Miyako and Kyoto and other places in Japan, I have still seen statues which still have such black color, although I think they were probably more common in those days. Okay, so Yasuke is taken to Nobunaga's castle, which is about 30 or 40 kilometers north of Kyoto on the banks of a great lake called Lake Biwa. We know from another Jesuit source at this point that Yasuke is appointed a weapon bearer. He is described as being a confidant of Nobunaga. And Nobunaga can't stop talking to him. Nobunaga is always going to see him, which is quite strange in itself. Normally, a great lord like Nobunaga would summon other people to see him, not go to them. So this is an honor and a way of showing how much Nobunaga esteems his new warrior. For this, Yasuke is given residence within the castle, Asuji Castle. Sadly, we don't know where that residence is. That would be some great archaeology. He's given a stipend. Sadly, we don't know how much the stipend was, because that would be a very good way of working out what his rank was within the Oda clan. He's given a servant to help him out, to look after him. He's given a sword. Now, this is the formal recognition of samurai rank. And in Japanese history, in Japan here, it is generally held that Yasuke was the first documented non-Japanese samurai. I'm sure that there were Koreans and Chinese who fought for Japanese lords before this. In fact, I know there were. But we have no documentation saying that they were employed as former warriors underneath the lord, rather than as just warriors to come on a temporary basis. So although he's probably not the first ever foreigner to fight for a Japanese lord, he's definitely the first who is recorded that we know of. Okay, and this is a wonderful picture which was painted well after the event, probably at least 20 years after the event. So although we think this is Yasuke, in fact I'm 95% sure that it is, this is not what Yasuke looked like. This is painted by somebody who never saw Yasuke and has only been able to imagine what a black man might look like later on. But in this painting, if we take this as a representation of Yasuke, we can see this is Nobunaga. This is very similar to other pictures of Nobunaga, so I think we can say with a very high degree of certainty that it is not. We can see Nobunaga's warriors around waiting to wrestle. We can see one warrior already wrestling with Yasuke, and we can see members of the court, both male and female, enjoying picnic lunches, enjoying a bit of chit-chat, just the way you do if you go to the sumo in Tokyo today. You enjoy a few drinks and chat and some nice food while you're watching. This is a pictorial proof that Yasuke did more than just sit in his house, did more than just stand behind Nobunaga as something for people to look at and go at. This is Yasuke engaging in war games. This is Yasuke engaging in samurai training with Nobunaga's men and with his comrades. There's a few other representations of Yasuke like African men, men that are possibly depictions of Yasuke around this time. This is from a lacquerware writing case, fudebako, where you have your ink and your brushes. It's a very expensive one, obviously, it's extremely ornate. We can see here a very, very tall black man, in contrast to a shorter Portuguese merchant here. We know he's a merchant because of the hat, he's not a priest. We can see that man is extremely rich because of the cut of his clothes. He's got this velvet cape. He's extremely well dressed. He even has some kind of, this could be a family emblem here, we're not sure. And of course, it's too late to find out more. He has silken slippers. If we go back to the other ones, if you look at the other pictures of Africans, which I showed you earlier, many of them have bare feet. This man has silken slippers instead of bare feet. He also has two swords. These are not Japanese swords, though the fact of having two swords suggests that it was a Japanese artist who assumed that he should have two swords as a samurai, but couldn't quite bring himself to make them Japanese swords. We can see that the Portuguese merchant here only has one sword, which would have been far more the Portuguese manner. So again, we've got representation of Yasuke decades after the event, perhaps even 30 or 40 years after the event, with no knowledge of what he actually looked like or would have worn, but in the mind's eye, kind of trying to imagine what this contemporary star might have looked like. There's also two boys in this picture here. One of them equally well dressed with silken slippers. This is a heraldic emblem. I don't know which family it represents. And he also has a rather ornate ruff as well. This could possibly be this man's son. Possible. We don't know. This other boy here is probably the servant of the Portuguese merchant. You can see him carrying his cloak, his coat, clothes. He's not so well dressed, although he still has shoes. And this is an interesting possibility here that Yasuke might have had a son. Okay. There's a series of products with this kind of pictures on them. I've found two, or two have found, one by me, one by a friend. And it'd be great if we could find some more in museums around the world. There must have been quite a few made. This is a picture of Azuchi Castle, where Yasuke lives. The mountain itself, which of course still exists today, is not quite as high as this in reality. So this is slightly exaggerated, but you do get the idea. The whole mountain was the fortress. The walls extended all the way up. They extended different parts for defensive purposes. And if you walk up, which probably takes 20 minutes to half an hour, it's a huge, huge, huge castle. You walk up to the top here where Tenshikaku was, which is 7 stories high. This was the highest ever built to that point in Japan. This was Nobunaga's home. This is his palace, essentially, if you like. Yasuke would not have lived there. Other key retainers, Nobunaga's ladies, people that Nobunaga would have wanted to be able to summon at short notice, lived around these top environs here, within around 5 minutes walk of the castle, so that Nobunaga could summon them whenever he took the fancy. So we could possibly guess that Yasuke was around this top here, though we don't. Okay, so now we get on to the action, if you like. Yasuke, I suspect at the beginning, as we kind of talked about, was a bit of a fad at first. It would have been something to raise up Nobunaga's stature and his status among the nation and his supplicants. However, it's very clear from the sources that he soon won his lord's trust, engaged in training with his samurai, engaged in conversation. What would they have talked about? Almost definitely they would have talked about war. The warriors. Nobunaga had never met a warrior from a foreign culture before. He'd met Chinese engineers, he'd met European priests, he'd met possibly students from other countries, For instance, there were some Koreans and people from Ryukyu Kingdom studying in Kyoto at the time, or there on business. However, he never would have met a real warrior, and Yasuke would have been his first. Therefore, they would have had a wonderful array of things to talk about, both about possibly African warfare, although Yasuke was probably trafficked when he was a child, so that's unlikely, but very much, definitely, he would have been involved in warfare in India. He was in India perhaps for 10 to 12 years, and he was almost definitely a mercenary or a slave soldier of sort. He would have been trained with all sorts of weapons. He would have seen elephants in action. He would have seen cannon in action. Those were still fairly unfamiliar in Japan at this time. Big guns, small guns were very common, but big guns were fairly unfamiliar. And he might have even seen things like camels as well. Nobunaga would have been fascinated by any of this. We know that Yasuke accompanied Nobunaga on campaign once, probably twice. The first campaign where there is no record of Yasuke being there was a campaign in Iga against Ninja. Nobunaga's son had been thrashed by them a few years before, and Nobunaga wanted revenge. He attacked with overwhelming force and won very quickly. We do not know whether Yasuke was there or not, but he probably was. The next one, we do know that Yasuke was there because there's a record of his presence in a diary written by a samurai in the service of a different lord. And we know that Yasuke took part in this campaign to subdue the Takeda clan, who were in the mountains just north of Mount Fuji. The Takeda had been weakened over many years due to Nobunaga's attack and due to battles with Nobunaga. This was the final battle. In this campaign, Nobunaga and his son Nobutada destroyed the Takeda. Yasuke, whether he actually took part in the frontline fighting or not is uncertain, but he was definitely there in the campaign. Then they have returned in triumph to Azuchi Castle, Nobunaga's castle, and there is a request from another general in the west who's campaigning against the Mori clan in the west. Nobunaga, my lord, please send more troops. We need help. We need reinforcements. Nobunaga decides to go himself. Normally he would set out himself on these campaigns. There's a few years where he hasn't been on any campaigns, but he's obviously feeling more energetic and feeling he's got time for this. So he sets out for the Western Front with only 30 men. At the same time, he orders 2 or 3 of his close retainers to gather their men, 10,000, 5,000, all of their troops, and march independently to what is now Okayama Prefecture, just west of Kobe, and to engage in the battle there. They stay the first night in Kyoto. The 30 men with Nobunaga, including Yasuke, stay the first night in Kyoto. In the morning, before first light, Akechi Mitsuhide, who had been one of the trusted generals ordered to muster his own troops, betrayed Nobunaga. He took those 13,000 men of his and he attacked Nobunaga's 30 men. Of course, there was no competition. Nobunaga and his men are asleep in the temple. When they hear motion outside, they hear gunshots. They wake up, they grab their weapons. They haven't got time to put on armor or anything, and they go to the entrance to the temple to see hordes of enemy who were the friends the day before charging at them. They do their best to hold out in the main temple building so that Nobunaga has time to perform seppuku. That's the ritual disembowelment, which should preserve his honor in death. And legend has it that Nobunaga's last order is Yasuke, save my head. Now, there's quite a lot of legends about what Nobunaga is to have said last, so nobody actually knows which one is the true one, or if any of them are true. However, for these purposes, Yasuke was ordered to save Nobunaga's head from falling into the enemy hands. Why? Because the head was a powerful symbol of legitimacy. If Akechi had managed to grab Nobunaga's head, hold it up to people and say, I am the vanquisher of Nobunaga. I am now the new ruler. I am now the new Nobunaga. Follow me. It would be more difficult for people to ignore him, and it would have been far more powerful a ruler. As it is, the head was never found. Legend has it that it was Yasuke that saved the head. He ran through the streets of Kyoto. Very difficult to do when there's lots of enemy soldiers running around, but he did it and took the head to Nobunaga's heir, Nobutada, who was in a temple between 5 and 10 minutes walk away, the Myokakuji. Nobutada had about 200 men with him. They fought much longer. They held out in a much stronger position, but they were also gunned down when Akechi's soldiers got on the roofs of neighbouring houses and shot down into the compound where Nobutada and his men were holding out. After a few hours, it was finished. Yasuke, we know, surrendered at the end. We think he was wounded. Some of the Jesuit sources suggest that he was wounded. What happened to the head? We don't know. But Nobutada's body was burnt. Perhaps Nobunaga's head was burnt with that. Sadly, we shall never know the truth of that story. Yasuke was returned to the Jesuit church by Akechi troops, and the Jesuits are recorded as having given great thanks to God for his delivery. So we know that he was a man of consequence, may not be the right word, but we know that the Jesuits cared about him and his life as well. He wasn't just a nobody for them. This is a picture of the Honnoji incident, the battle I just described. We can see here at the right, this is Nobunaga. He's getting ready to perform his seppuku. We can see the fully armed Akechi soldiers. They've prepared for their attack. They've marched into Kyoto, ready for battle. We can also see the unarmored, almost unarmed order men, the men who are supposed to be defending Nobunaga, but have just woken up and have just grabbed whatever came to hand. This particular man here is called Mori Ranmaru. This was Nobunaga's lover. The relationship between Nobunaga and Mori is one of the most romantic in Japanese history, particularly because of the death aspect to it. Again, it's slightly legend. We would probably never know the 100% truth, but Mori Ranmaru is supposed to have stood as Kaishaku, as second to Nobunaga. After Nobunaga slit his stomach, Mori Ranmaru is supposed to have taken the head off to reduce the pain and to end the pain, to end the suffering. That was the common way that people did it. Ranmaru himself, after that, was supposed to have killed himself. Whether Yasuke took Ranmaru's head as an act of pity or not, we don't know. Anyway, that was the battle. This is the only surviving picture of the Jesuit mission in Kyoto where Yasuke was taken to. About 40 years later, Christianity, or Catholicism anyway, becomes prohibited in Japan. There are very many reasons for this, but mainly because the Jesuit priests were causing issues to the government, and the government believed that it was not a wise thing to have Catholics who were loyal to an outside power, i.e. the Pope in Rome, but also who owed allegiance to the rulers of Japan, by then become the Tokugawa family. Allegiances should not be shared in the Tokugawa belief, and therefore Catholics were asked at first, almost politely, to recant. When they didn't recant, they were ordered to recant. When they still didn't recant, if there were any left, and there aren't a few percent left by this point, they were tortured until they did. Many left Japan and ended up in places all around the world, as far afield as Mexico, Spain, Thailand, Philippines, southern China. There's a great diaspora of Japanese Christians at this time, many, probably tens of thousands strong. Anyhow, back to the church. You can see this church is built in a somewhat Asian manner, but it's also much, much taller than all the other buildings, which are basically a single story. So it would have stood out in Kyoto. It wouldn't have stood out so much it would have looked more like a pagoda or a temple, which is what it was supposed to look like. Here we can see the Jesuit priests. We can see people at the business in the streets outside. And this is in Kobe Museum, Kobe City Museum now. It was actually a fan originally, and somehow must have survived somebody's closet for many hundreds of years until Christianity became legal again. Okay, coming towards the end now. Yasuke was forgotten for many centuries. We don't know when he was forgotten in Japan. There's some suggestion that he may have been remembered for up to 100 years afterwards. But he was certainly, there was no particular reference to him after the 17th century. Until, that is, the 20th century, when the Jesuits records, the Jesuit letters from Japan were discovered in moulding libraries in Portugal, and Japanese historians started to translate them into Japanese. The final translations were completed in the 1940s, and at that point, suddenly, the story of the Jesuits in Japan, so long suppressed by Japanese authorities or ignored after Christianity again became illegal, was there for all to see. And with the rest of the story of the Jesuit mission came Yasuke's story again. In the 1960s, he was born as an anti-imperialist symbol. There were 2 books written about him, one of which was published in the 1970s, that show him or use his life as a metaphor for anti-imperialism, for the bad state of the world, for the civil rights movement in America. And these are the 2 books which sort of brought Yasuke back to the world's attention. Since 1999, he has been even more, become even more animated, become even more alive again. Computer games, anime, manga, movies, books, theatre. Many of these stories are not actually him. They are characters based on his story. For example, Afro Samurai, which was manga and then anime in 1999 to today, I believe, it's still being made. There's a movie made, titled again, in I think 2005. The main character is Yasuke's grandson, for example. In the theatre productions and some of the books, Yasuke's story, Yasuke is Yasuke, he's called Yasuke, or sometimes something slightly different like Sasuke. But the story is highly fictionalized. He's got this kind of character which people really want to relate to, really want to talk about. And as I was doing research on him over the last 10 years or so, I found, by talking to many people who were familiar with the story, that he's kind of been reborn as a source of inspiration to people around the world. His story from nothing to the highest ranks of another country really rings a bell with people. That he managed to go through, get through a difficult life and end up making a success of it. And all sorts of aspects of his life resonate with people around the world. This is a portrayal of Yasuke in a computer game called Neo from 2017. I believe it was one of the biggest grossing games of the year. And Yasuke is actually a baddie in this one. He is a playable baddie. The hero, or you as the hero, or whoever you're playing as, can fight for him. But he's a bit of a heroic baddie. He is fighting to raise his master, Nobunaga's soul from the underworld and to bring it back to life. So he's a likable baddie in this movie, and this computer game. Sorry. This is another trailer of him in Nobunaga's Ambition. It's a long-running series of computer games, and this is the 2013 version. You can see him very much here as a hybrid Japanese warrior in a kimono here, but with a kind of Portuguese frilled jacket, overcoat, waistcoat here, and he's got a very much Afro kind of star dress as well. This was the artist must have had quite a lot of fun with this depiction of Yasuke. We can see him here portrayed here in a theatre production of the book We Are a Beat Tribe. This is from 2017. I believe there have been manga and anime made from this, but originally it was a kind of semi-historical novel, a novel based upon historical, or set in a historical setting. Yasuke has escaped from the battle of Honnoji after Nobunaga's death. He's down and out. He needs to find some money, and somehow he gets in with this crowd of street performers, and they're all kind of down and out. And together they start a band. They end up a successful music group. Okay, we come to the end now in modern society, social, cultural aspects of Yasuke's inheritance, Yasuke's meaning for today. Japan, as many of you will probably know, has been rapidly becoming extremely more diverse over the last 30 years, and ever more so in the last decade. There's been a massive increase in foreigners residing in Japan, both short-term and long-term. There's also been a massive increase in tourism, something like tenfold, up to more than 30 million before the pandemic hit. The target was to have been 40 million for the Olympic year as well. So you can, Japanese streets, Japanese neighborhoods feel very different. People from different backgrounds walking around, living there, people from different backgrounds visiting there. Very different from when I first came to Japan over 20 years ago. Many people, of course, after they've been here a long time, decide to naturalize. The success rate of those naturalizations is around 99%. So, as you can see, they're trying to facilitate naturalizations as far as possible. And generally, that's between 10 and 20,000 a year. The figures show over the last 2 decades. In the workforce, people working within Japanese organizations, not simply working outside the Japanese world in foreign companies, etc. There's a massive increase in the visibility of foreigners in the workforce, especially Chinese and Vietnamese people, especially the Chinese who have graduated from Japanese universities are now working their way in management as well, which will bring a very different view of Japanese companies in the coming future. To facilitate all of this, the government has very much liberalized visa and immigration policies. It's much easier to get permanent residency now, and it's much easier also to get visas for different industries, which previously visas were not able to be obtained for. Of course, with all of this increase in foreign residents and naturalized citizens come mixed heritage citizens. Babies born over the last 20 years are now beginning to come of age, and coming of age ceremonies all over the country are seeing not only ethnically Japanese people, but also ethnically mixed and ethnically non-Japanese people at the coming of age ceremony in far bigger numbers than they ever were before. One of the wards in Shinjuku, part of Tokyo, a couple of years ago, had, I think it was 52, these figures may be wrong, but they're approximate. 52% of the people at the coming of age day ceremony were not Japanese, and that doesn't include mixed heritage citizens. That is only people whose nationality was not Japanese. You can see that things are statistically, visibly changing. Yasuke has been born as a kind of pioneer. He's been on Japanese television to talk about him a few times. And one of the things they always ask is, what does Yasuke mean for our future? We can see Japan is changing. How does Yasuke's story fit into this? How can he help us understand how Japan will be in the future? What lessons can we learn from his life? Of course, the leader of this, the one who's most obvious to the whole world, is Osaka Naomi, born of Haitian father and Japanese mother. Mainly grew up in the US, but she chose to represent Japan in tennis, and has been an amazing success over the last few years. In Japan, she's very much accepted as Japanese, even though there have been questions and debates about it. Generally, among the people that I've talked to, and indeed the way she's treated in the media, she is treated as Japanese, not as American or as a foreigner, even though she hasn't even grown up in Japan for that much. Okay, and she is only the most prominent of from citizens. We have quite a few examples here, and there are, of course, many, many more. Last year, in 2020, Miss Universe Japan was Tochigaisha Harumi. 5 years ago, the same Miss Universe Japan was a girl called Miyamoto Ariana. We also have people like Sekiguchi Mani, singer, Konda Bobby, who's an entertainer. He's a naturalized citizen rather than a born citizen, born mixed heritage citizen. Hachimura Rii is a professional basketball player who I believe now plays in America. Matsushima Kotaro is a player, international. Both these people are internationals if they're sports people. Nun Ira Karen is a judo player, if you like, a wrestler. And the Japanese person who holds the 100-meter sprint record in 9.97 seconds is Sani Brown Abdul Hakim. I believe one of his parents was from North Africa. These are some of the pictures of those people. As you can see, they both look African and Japanese, and generally more and more are accepted as such. And hopefully that's partly to Yasuke's legacy. Okay, as kindly said at the beginning, this is the book upon which the talk has been based. The paperback is out this week, in fact. It was out on the 2nd. Ideal time to get the book if you're interested in the talk, and I really hope you enjoy it. Please contact me on Facebook. You can get my Facebook page here if you click on this QR code, or just type in Thomas Lockley, author, on Facebook for updates on Yasuke research, Yasuke's life, other events related to Yasuke, and general stuff like that. Okay. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to answering your questions. I believe we've got about 20 minutes.
Thank you for your presentation, Professor Lockley. I really enjoyed it. So for the Q&As, please be sure to provide your name and affiliation when submitting questions. And please send questions along to everyone. Also, like it says at the bottom, submitting a question allows you to enter for a chance to win a book for the book giveaway. So if you're interested, please submit a question along with your name and affiliation. And lastly, for future events, we have our survey, so you can scan it by the QR code or enter the URL into your website. So please do this because this is how we are able to evaluate our event and also see what more topics you would like to have in the future. So I'm happy that we did a topic like this during Black History Month, which provides a different type of narrative of Black history. So thank you. So yeah, please be sure to complete the survey and submit a question if you have any questions you would like to be answered. So now I'm going to pass on to Jisoo. Thank you.
So once again, I mean, that was just fascinating. I would like to use my prerogative as a moderator to ask the first question, if I may. So I just have to ask this question. It's just a simple question out of curiosity. So do you know anything about his marriage life?
About his
marriage life? I don't, because I don't think I heard you say anything about his marriage life, whether he was married in Japan or not, or whether he had a relationship. Is there any source that you were able to read about this?
Okay, I can comment on the fact that we have no concrete evidence of that. The Jesuits were priests and they didn't really prove relationships really, so they didn't comment on any of that. And the two Japanese sources we have for his life, simply remarking on his warrior abilities, his size, and his status, his rank. So we haven't got that about him. However, we do have information about other black men that might have been him. We don't know about. And you can read about these in detail in the book. There is, for example, one who was based in what is now Kumamoto Prefecture, Higo province, who's described as having several wives and children. And he was a senior retainer to the Lord Kato Kiyomasa, who was very much involved in the invasions of Korea in the 1990s. And this African retainer was involved in supplying the troops who were in Korea at the time. So we know that there are Africans that did have children, did have families at the time. My guess would be Yasuke had ladies. Every samurai did. especially a samurai who of such a high ranking as him, he would have been given ladies essentially, whether married or not. That was not the custom at the time necessarily. You can find out a lot more about that.
Yeah. I guess I mean, my question was not specifically directed to Yasuke, but among blacks at the time, because it seems like he was not the only one there. So then, I was just wondering whether there was that kind of relationship that they were families.
Absolutely, no question. Just for how many, there's an estimate of how many Africans there were between about at Yasuke's time and about 50 years later. The estimates range between 3,000 and 300 and 2,000. Temporary visitors, easily to 2,000. Sailors on ships, etc., etc. Permanent residents, probably more like 300, I'd say.
Wow, that's just so interesting. Okay, we received questions before this event, so I think I would like to start with those questions and then move on to questions that we received during the presentation. Okay, so it's a question from Oludayo Adibao from Spelman College. So is asking, I was wondering if you think that there could be more stories similar to this one, and if so, why aren't they more widely known about? Is it just because they could be lost in history, or maybe another reason?
Okay, thanks for the question. There are hundreds of stories like Yasuke's. Yasuke is one, because he was linked to two very important men in history. We have quite a lot of information for his life. There are many other people like him, both Africans or other Asians or even Europeans, who did similar things, that were employed by lords in the remote parts of the world and just simply weren't recorded, mainly because those records are burnt or the people didn't think it was enough to record them. I am trying to find more and more of these. You can look for some similar stories on my website, academia.edu. I'm working with more right now. I like to call them people who have fallen through the cracks of history. And yes, there are hundreds of them. And everybody should go and find more people who've fallen through the cracks of history.
All right, thank you. I have a question from Michael Osborne. Why did Yasuke stand out among all the Africans there? And his name sounds Japanese, but that wasn't his original name, of course. What was it?
Okay, number one, first of all, his size, his strength, he was handsome, and he was in the right place at the right time to be recorded. As I said before, the people he was connected with were some of the best recorded people in that era. We've got books and books about Galliano and Nobunaga's lives, so that makes it much easier for us to access him. As to the name, we have no idea what the original name was. Yasuke is a fairly common name from that era in Japanese history. It could be that Nobunaga bestowed that name upon him. It could be that that was a Japanese rendering of his original name. Now, I went back and looked at as many names as possible, which could be close to that, and the closest I got was Yasuke, or to English would be Isaac. So in Arabic or Portuguese, there are various different pronunciations which sound similar to Yasuke, Yashak, and that's what I decided it probably was, if that was indeed the case.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so next question by Nicholas Groth. I guess this is a quick yes or no question, but I was wondering if this story is actually true. The name of the event suggests it is true. However, the description refers to it as mythical. So I guess it's your answer would be yes.
I don't think it refers to as mythical anywhere. Legendary, yes, but legendary in the way that somebody is a legendary president or somebody is a legendary warrior. It doesn't mean they are stuff of legend. It just means they've reached the height where their story is almost too good to be true. Yes, the story is absolutely true. I can't remember the exact amount of sources to his life, but it's at least 12 if you include the artwork.
We'll get next question. by Dr. Beatrice Morales Faba. Explain the influences that samurai culture has had in the political and economic development of modern Japan.
That's a very big question. You could write books upon that. I think as we're talking about Yasuke today, I'm going to mainly keep Yasuke's influence on modern Japan. All I can say is that after the Meiji Restoration of 1868, the samurai class was abolished, but the men who had been samurai and the women who had been samurai then became the modern government. And of course, they brought their way of life and their morals and their ethics into modern government and into the 20th century, and to a certain extent even today. And I'll leave it at that because I could write a book on it. Thank you for your question.
Do you, based on the sources, do you know what part of Africa do you think he, I mean, what part of Africa he came from? Do you have any information on that? This was again a question from Beatrice Morales.
There's one resource 45 years, written 45 years after. It's a secondary resource written in Paris by a Jesuit who says he came from Mozambique. Now, it's highly unlikely he came from Mozambique. It's most likely that that was an assumption due to his links with the Portuguese. He's more likely to have come from Northeast Africa, what is now Ethiopia and Sudan. I suspect during, if you look at his size, his skin color, and his demeanor, everything which was described by the Japanese sources, he sounds like he's from South Sudan, perhaps a member of the Nuer or the Dinka people, who are to this day the tallest people in the world. So very much more likely to be from that area than from Mozambique. We'll never know the truth, but that's my academic conclusion.
Thank you. I have a question from Dan Paraka. Did Yasuke paint or write poetry in Japanese? So how versed was he in Japanese?
We have no source at all from Yasuke's own mouth, therefore we don't know.
Okay, we have a question from Fong. What is the tradition of the Black Buddha? Is it still continued? Are there any temples dedicated to it?
The Black Buddha, Shaka, is not necessarily a separate Buddha from any other Buddha. If you go into a temple, the statue of Shakyamuni, the Buddha, is portrayed in many different ways. There's no one or unique portrayal of this. I'm not a religious historian. I can't go into this. But what I will say is I know and I've heard that there are still statues of Buddha that are black. I've not seen any. What I have seen, though, is many, many other deities, kami, or the protectors of shrines, the devils or the other protectors of shrines. They are very often in many different colors, including black, red, sometimes green even. And therefore, those colors are still associated, not in the modern mind, but they would have been originally in a much more credulous age, would have been associated with deity and divinity, I think.
Thanks. So Sophia Crook from College of William and Mary is asking, well, thanks for speaking today. What kind of sources were referenced to learn more about Yasuke and his story? Was it mostly Portuguese writing, or were there Japanese reference as well? So were you referring primarily to Japanese sources, or did you also utilize Portuguese sources?
There's a range of sources. Put me on the spot now. I think there's probably about 4 or 5 Portuguese sources, and there's 2 Japanese sources that reference Yasuke's life specifically. There are then several other Japanese sources which reference people who might be Yasuke after the event. And there's another Portuguese source that references somebody who might be Yasuke after the event as well. There are the artworks, which are all Japanese. And then some of the secondary reporting later on, for example, the one I mentioned about Mozambique is actually in French. So you have a range of different sources and a range of different languages about him. I believe there's a couple of Latin as well, because of course these were priests and they would have written in Latin at times too.
We have a question from Koji Otani, high school Japanese teacher. So Sengoku era is when nobody trusted nobody. Even they killed their own parents. Why do you think Akechi captured or released him?
You're going to have to read the book to find that. That's one of the cruxes of the plot. However, Akechi had very good reasons not to kill him. And the fact that he didn't kill him, he's supposed to have said, the man is a black man, he's not one of us, he's not Japanese, he has no honor, just take him away. But that doesn't actually, normally in that case, it would have been simpler for Akechi just to smack his head off. So there's a lot more to it. The book does tell you.
All right, thank you. So we have a question from Reese Willis. She's a Japanese Studies major at the College of William and Mary. So her question is, where do you see Yasuke in terms of the pulls between true diversity and stereotypical idolization? Is he being represented in a way that Black people approve of also?
I guess it's the motivation talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
it's a very good question. People of African heritage who I've talked to have overwhelmingly been very positive about Yasuke's existence and about how he is being represented. I've been often asked how the Japanese react to Yasuke here in Japan, and I can say that when I wrote the book, I was wondering the same myself. Everybody kind of embraces him as a warrior, as a samurai, and I've not heard a single negative comment about the fact that a foreigner or an African foreigner served Nobunaga. Quite the contrary, he's starting to appear more and more on television in connection with Nobunaga, as you know, in the background of Nobunaga movies or dramas. There've been several special programs especially about Yasuke, one of which is coming up in the next couple of months. There's a whole documentary, an hour-and-a-half documentary on NHK next month. NHK is the main broadcaster here in Japan. And it would be very useful if some of the audience, some of whom I know, how are you doing? Thank you for coming today. Might be able to comment in the chat section as to whether they feel that is correct or not. I think so far most of the people of African heritage that I talk to have found that his story is being representative in a respectable way.
Okay, I think we have many questions from audience, as you can imagine, but we just have one more question to ask, because Professor Lockley has to leave precisely at 8:45 for another meeting. So I'll ask last question. Sorry for those questions, for those of you who I was not able to address your questions. This is a question from Professor Mason Kim, from Spelman College. So is Yasuke taught in formal education through history textbooks as a symbolic figure for diversity and multiculturalism in today's Japan?
He's not as yet in the formal textbooks. However, I'm a member of an academic, it's called in Japanese Gakkai, an academic committee, I guess, which is specifically about diversifying the history curriculum for high school students. And I know that some of those teachers, even though he may not be in the textbooks as yet, are specifically teaching about Yasuke. I've been asked to talk to high school students about him as well. Not only that, the way that history is taught in Japan doesn't necessarily concentrate on people like Yasuke at all. It concentrates on the ruler. It doesn't really look behind the rulers. And therefore, it's not just Yasuke who would be left out. It's virtually everybody else of any note, including Japanese people that played great roles behind the scenes. The curriculum of Japanese high schools is a long one. They don't just look at specific eras in detail. They look at the whole shebang from 2,000 years ago to today. So unfortunately, that doesn't leave much room for people like Yasuke, unless the teacher themselves is passionate and wants to do a special lesson. And I can tell you there are quite a lot that do.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation and answering all those questions. It's been really a great pleasure, and we learned so much through your book presentation today. And also, thank you very much for our audience for submitting your questions. Although we weren't able to get through all of them, I hope you can continue to be in touch with Professor Lockley if you want to engage in further discussion with him. All right, thank you.
Can I just say, I saw that there were some questions going up in the chat, and those weren't actually being dealt with in the. I think those were being dealt with separately. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to answer those questions. If you look me up on Facebook, you can ask the questions and I will happily answer them there. It's Thomas Lockley, author. Feel free to get in touch anytime. Thank you very much for having me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope you will have a great evening and a good night.